So, let me paint you a picture. You're a security analyst at company.com, not affiliated in any way, and it's your job to make sure that everything is running perfectly security-wise. It's 4:30 p.m. on a Friday, you're sitting at your desk killing time until 5 p.m, and you haven't told your boss that you've spent the last 30 minutes just browsing at dank memes. When you see that you've received an email, 4:30 p.m, plenty of time to quickly check your emails, when, damn it, hey Ian, just got this email, looks like phishing, but I wanted to check with you. Kind regards, David. Well, yeah, it looks pretty clearly bad, but what next? What are the next steps that you would take? What would you do? So in this talk, I'm going to be sharing my thoughts and experiences for how I'd go about responding to this type of scenario based on my experiences, and hopefully you can carry over to other incidents that you might have to deal with. By the end of this talk, you should be able to walk into an incident, understand what the broad goals are, and be familiar with some of the key roles and responsibilities, and hopefully be in a place to contribute to responding to an incident and ultimately learn from it with a broader set of context. So, who am I? My name's Ian, my handle's Cake. You can follow me on Twitter, not very active, but it's Cake and Keys. I'm a UTS alumni. I'm a current member of the CSEC advisory team. I've been in security since pretty much smack dab in the beginning of 2020. I work as a lead security engineer over at Willow, and as part of that role, I'm leading the response to incidents. I'm improving the broader posture of the company as well to prevent future incidents. And I'm also really keen into physical security, so if that's something you want to talk about, by all means, feel free to find me. So what is incident response? Let's start by establishing a common understanding of what incident response is. Incident response is when something bad has happened or might happen. Incident response is to cybersecurity what the emergency department is to healthcare. You're there dealing with a crisis. The goal is first and foremost to get you out of the emergency department or the incident and in a position to get further help at home, from the GP, or in another less intensive area of the hospital. You're not responsible for the lifelong health of the patient. Similarly, in a security incident, you're there to resolve the emergency or to put out the fire. Once the immediate threat is addressed, it's a separate task to make the broader process improvements or other changes. So, what goes into competent response? Well, a common framework for incident response is PICEL, which stands for Prepare, Identify, Contain, Eradicate, Recover, and Lessons Learned. This is a common framework. It's not the only one. It's the one that I'll be talking about here because it's generally pretty good. And generally in an incident, you're going to be handling it in this order. So PICERL. You don't start eradicating malware if it's still uncontained and it's still spreading. You don't start the process of containing without first understanding how it's spreading and what's happening. So let's look through what each of these mean. So P, prepare. This is everything that was done prior to the incident being called. This is all of the detections that you've made, all of the hardening that you've done, the playbooks you've built that prepare for this scenario, the training the team has, the tabletop exercises where you've rehearsed this. The medical equivalent would be, do we have all the right machines in the emergency room? Are the doctors that we need on call? Identify. So this is understanding what is going on. What are the indicators of compromise? What are the URLs people are browsing to? What are the file names of the malware? Things like that. How heavily impacted are we? If malware is involved, how many people have been compromised? If a phishing email was sent, who else received it? How do we start to contain and remediate this? Imagine there's a bunch of patients. Who needs help first? Contain. So at this point, let's stop things from getting worse. If there's malware spreading, you might start isolating things from the network. You might disable accounts if they've been compromised. The whole goal here is to just buy time to take further eradication steps, to further investigate. And it's important to note as well that at this point the attacker might become aware. So if they've previously been spreading through the network, now they might start running ransomware and encrypting things, or they might go the opposite direction and be really stealthy, really quiet, trying to get past the initial investigation and re-emerge later. They might start using completely different tools. So you might have to go through another round of investigating. This is like moving somebody with COVID to an isolation ward. The person with COVID needs treatment. They need a ventilator. They need all sorts of things, but you don't want to provide that care at the risk of other people or a broader COVID spread happening and other people potentially having that similar intervention required. So eradicating, this is where you're removing the threat, you're fixing the issue. If malware's on a machine, you're re-imaging it or nuking the machine, you're resetting passwords for compromised accounts. If there's a particular vulnerability that gave the attackers access, you might be installing emergency patches, but you really want to make sure that you don't rush this. Getting to eradicate and starting to eradicate the threat is not the end goal for an incident. All surgery has risks, and similarly, there are some risks that when you start eradicating, you might lose the trail. You might sort of think that you've fully recovered, you've done everything that you need to, but the attacker is still somewhere in the environment. This is the equivalent of actually undergoing surgery to address the issue. Recover. This is where you're starting to return to business as usual. So how do you get back to normal? If computers were re-imaged, how do you get those files back so that people can, go about their day-to-day lives, continue conducting business? You'll also go through a period of intense monitoring to make sure that all of the steps you've taken during the eradication have been successful. This would be the equivalent of getting the patient out of the emergency room and into the ward or the ICU. They still need care, they still need monitoring, but it's not at that sort of intense level of criticality. And finally, lessons learned. So it's always a cycle of looking at what you can do better. You're going to capture the learnings, making sure that you call things out that can be improved. This would be your home care plan, the prescriptions that you take, lifestyle changes. Basically, how did we get here and how do we prevent a repeat? Alrighty. We rushed through all that pretty quickly, but IRL, it might take days, weeks, or months for each step, depending on the scale of the incident. If there's nothing else you remember from this talk, please don't forget PyCell. There's courses online worth thousands of dollars that they teach you all about PyCell and how to apply it. So it's a really fundamental building block. But with all that out of the way, cast your mind back to the start of our scenario where David told us about the suspicious email. Have any of you ever clicked on a phishing email? Well, that's exactly what David's done. He's neglected to tell us, but in addition to reporting it, he's only reported it and told us about it after already clicking on it. So with that in mind, we're now having to go through the process of doing PyCell for David. So prepare. This is everything that we've done prior to the incident, the things that we had in place that could have already caught the phishing email. This is the external sender banner that was at the top of the email saying, the sender for this email is outside of the company. This is the mail filter that could have, blocked an email when it was received. This is the antivirus or the EDR that, if there was malware on the email, it would have blocked it potentially. The web filters that could have, blocked David from going onto the link. The playbooks that clearly define what the response is. Maybe you've rehearsed phishing emails a million times before, but a bunch of this preparation didn't mean anything because despite the external sender banner, despite everything, David clicked on the link. So we're through to the next phase, identify. So we asked David, has he done anything else with the email besides reporting it? And this is where we find out he's visited the URL, he's provided his details. So maybe he also replied to the email. He could have replied saying, what is this? Could you tell me more? We also would want to start looking at who else received this email. We could check the sender. Have they sent to anyone else in the company? We could check the subject because it could be a different sender but the same subject. Both of those could be different. So they could be sending, we have to look at emails sent around the same time. We can go a step further. So were there any redirects? So when you click on the link, does it take you straight away to the page or does it jump you around through different places? There's a tool such as Where Goes that takes you, provides you a nice little list of everything that it went through. How do you safely interact with and investigate the link? You can use sandboxes. There's a tool called BrowserLink, which is a really cool tool. It's designed for browser compatibility testing where it tells you, this is how it renders in Chrome, in Firefox, and Internet Explorer. But it provides you a little browser with almost like a virtual machine. It provides that little bit of extra distance for just 1 minute to quickly see what does the link show you. And then you can also just search online. If you Google the sender, you Google the subject name. If you go on VirusTotal and you type the domain in there, what do you find? Things like that. So let's say we've gone through and has anyone seen a page like this before? Well, it's quite clearly a Microsoft login page where it's impersonating that, and it's likely trying to steal credentials. So what they're typically asking you for is to log in so that they can steal your account details and then either sell them online or they could use the access to your account to steal sensitive information, or they could use the access to the account to send a more convincing phishing email from inside of the company. So we've gone through everything. Let's sort of just recap. What are the IOCs? What are the sort of key features of this phishing email? Well, what did the link ask for? It asked for Microsoft login details. Were there any redirects? Let's just say that there weren't. And who else received it? Let's say that the entire organization, everybody in the company, has received this phishing email as well. So next step again, so pivoting. So did anyone enter their login details on the fake login page? So we know David has. What about everyone else? Has the attacker used those login details somewhere? And importantly, we might use Microsoft. They might provide Microsoft account details, but those login details could be used elsewhere as well. And the attacker is probably going to try the same username and password in a whole bunch of different places. But for the sake of simplicity, let's just assume that we've caught this. People have submitted their account details. They've typed in their password, but the attacker hasn't done anything yet. So the attacker hasn't tried to actually log into the accounts, use the passwords, anything like that. So containing, how do we prevent anyone else from falling for the phish? Well, we can start by blocking the link in the email, but we have to consider as well, has the attacker used the same link for everyone? We could delete the email from people's inboxes. So if it's a global company, perhaps the people in America or Europe, they're not working at the moment. They could be asleep. So you can remove the email from their inboxes and they don't even know that there has been a phishing email sent. You could send out an email or a message advising people saying, hey, there's been phishing, please don't fall for it. You could block the sender and the subject line from sending further emails. Generally, an attacker will sort of use the one email and then sort of that's it. They don't tend to come back and reuse the same thing, but you never know. You can always sort of take the extra step. So we've contained it, but let's go about eradicating it. So how do we stop further damage from occurring due to David falling for the phish? Well, because the attacker hasn't actually used the account details anywhere, all we pretty much need to do at the moment is reset the passwords of anyone who provided their credentials. There is a whole lot more that goes into this because, once again, they could use the same username and password in a whole bunch of different places. Do we have any way of knowing? You're probably going to be talking with David and everyone asking them to, remember, all the different accounts that they potentially have. But, we'd be looking to reset the passwords here. So recover. So how do we get back to normal now that David and everyone else has had their password reset? Did resetting the password break any integrations? It's possible there's a little, a PowerShell script or there's a little, Office macro or something like that that relied on the, username and password of an account to do some sort of automation. It's, not ideal, but, that's what happens sometimes. How do you communicate the new password if it wasn't initiated by the user? If I reset David's password, not him, obviously I don't want to just send him an email saying, hey, here's your new password. Does he have access to his email? What if an attacker still has access to the emails? They could potentially see the new plain text password. What if it's a shared account split between 3 different people? Things like that. And finally, we get to the lessons learned. So you probably want to set some time aside later to investigate how to improve the mail filter. So not right now, but in the future, let's see what we could do to improve it, to prevent something similar in the future. Could we have been faster to respond to the issue? Could we have been faster to remediate the issue? And what could have gone wrong? So I credit my co-worker, Eddie, for introducing me to the term, but what's the bus factor or the key person dependency? So how many people have to get hit by a bus before there is a major issue? So if I got hit by a bus and it was, I'm not available there and I can't help, well, who's going to be responding to the incident? Is the attacker now going to, have free reign? What if David didn't report the email? Would anyone have reported it? Would we not find out about this at all, potentially? Alrighty, that was a lot of stuff to go through. And in large organizations where potentially dozens or many, many more phishing emails are received every day, you'll spend a lot of time just responding and handling phishing emails. There's only so many things you can do during the day, so that's why it's important to prioritize and focus on the biggest threat first. You can do a whole bunch of automation and likely that's one thing that you would look at here, but when it comes to prioritizing, you're often going to be looking at targeting and sophistication. So these are some of the things that can help guide you with triaging to understand the threat posed by a particular phishing email, but the idea of targeting and sophistication applies to all possible threats. There's countless online bots that scan for vulnerable websites online, but if you spot an IP that's known to be used by a sophisticated attacker and it's targeting things very specific to your setup, you should probably be quite a bit more alarmed. So yeah, there's a few there. I'll just sort of briefly go over that. There's was it sent to everyone? Was it sent to just you? Was it sent from an account that's designed to impersonate something specific to the company, or was it just a standard Gmail, Hotmail account? Is the language natural or unnatural? Things like that. So I've got a couple of examples up there. I'm just going to put them up for a second, and then we'll sort of go through them, and we'll sort of apply this process of triaging to see how targeted is it and how sophisticated is it. Alrighty. Dear Ian at company.com, order confirmation email. Your renewal request has been accepted. Service will be renewed within 24 hours. Looks like, once again, looks a little bit suspicious. Let's assume that it was sent to countless emails and companies, spread, spammed across the entire internet pretty much. It was sent from a standard Gmail address. Order is spelt with a 0, likely to try and, get through any sort of email filters. There's probably nicer ways, but, it might be effective, but it definitely does seem a little bit unnatural. So, yeah, it's, spammed across the entire internet. It looks like it was automated to autofill information. It mentions Ian at company.com, for example. It's sent from a standard Gmail account. It uses some unnatural language with the 0 in order, things like that. And so the next one. So, dear Ian, your company.com mailbox password will expire. Go to email account settings. So for this one, it was sent to the entirety of company.com, not outside of the company, and it was sent from adam@legitorg.com.au. So this one, it's targeting just our company, so it's a little bit more focused. It's automated to include some autofill information. So it says Ian at company, it would probably say Dave at company, things like that. It's using a compromised account of another company, so legit.org, or potentially they set that up themselves. But it's still just a fairly generic, reset password link. Cool. So in reality, incidents come in many different forms and particularly sizes, from things that can be resolved by a single person with limited further input to big critical events where people from across the business are dragged into a room to lend their help in the response. And it's precisely these sorts of larger incidents that I want to talk about. So I touched on it a little bit on some of the earlier slides with things such as sending out an advisory to the organization, but beyond just the technical aspects, interpersonal and non-technical skills play a crucial role in effective incident response. So communicating within the team. If you've got a whole bunch of people working on resolving a major incident, how do you prevent doubling up of effort? How do you make sure that you don't have 5 people investigating the exact same piece of information and people are spread out and spreading their efforts and covering more ground? How do you share new information, both in the moment so that other people can take advantage of that new information to provide nuance and investigate further? But what about in an hour when somebody else joins the team? Are they going to be starting from scratch, or do they have some way of catching up and understanding what new information you've found since? So often when I run tabletops or sort of incident response simulations, I like to start the scenario off by saying that someone's unavailable. Maybe the head of security is on a yacht race somewhere, or the lead incident responder is running back from lunch and only has their phone. Is the person that comes in later briefed properly? How much time did it take to brief them? How complete is their understanding of not just the issue, but where it currently sits and what the focuses are moving forward? So there's also communication within the business. So, within the team, but then also the business. So how do you notify the broader business? So, when you're sending a message out to the broader business about a security issue, does it need to go through some form of approval? How do you structure the message as well to effectively communicate? I'm a big fan of the what, so what next format. It's worked well for me. We've received a lot of phishing emails. So what? Please don't click on phishing emails. Tell us if you have. What next? We'll let you know if there's any other updates. How do you brief the board or executives or other key stakeholders about the issue? And then how do you handle people asking you potentially 1,000 different questions, 1,000 different people saying, what does this phishing email mean? My computer's slowed down, I can no longer turn on my machine, I've got this ransomware message popping up. How do you handle all of those different people asking you questions? There's also communication outside of the business. So if it impacts people outside of the business, what do you communicate with them? Does it need to go through some form of approval? Similarly, do you even know who needs to provide that approval? Do they know that they need to provide approval, and what that approval would involve, and the type of communication that it should be? Do you have any reporting obligations? So if your critical infrastructure, something like telecommunications, energy, things like that, you might have some obligations to report any sort of security incidents. Or if you're dealing with customer sensitive data and you lose that sensitive data, or there's been a major incident, you might have an obligation to report that to the customers themselves. How do you make sure that people don't inappropriately share internal information as well? So if you're working at an organization that's got a call center, a lot of customers, what if the customers are calling up asking, what's going on? I'm hearing on the news that you've been hacked. What's going on? Is my personal data safe? You probably might want to say, until you know the full context of what's happened, saying something, we're investigating, will keep you updated. What do you share? Alrighty, so during any major incident, a war room will be set up to help facilitate the response. This war room will contain all the key stakeholders so that they're able to quickly and effectively communicate. The makeup of a war room will depend on what the issue is, as well as the company's size, industry, and policies or standards that could have been set internally. Generally, on the cyber side, there are three main roles which are filled. Firstly, the incident commander. They're responsible for the overall coordination and strategy. They're also the bridge between the responders and the outside world. And unless there's somebody dedicated to it, somebody responsible for communications, they'll take on that responsibility as well often. So checking what messages are being sent to the board, what are they informing the board, what sort of comms go out to the broader business, things like that. There's also the scribe, which is actually a really important role. They're keeping track of what's happening, and they're noting down any findings, focuses, and other important information. When you've got people in the middle of an incident, heads down, super focused on resolving and responding to the threat, for them to take notes and things like that, it's going to pull them out of focus. So it often helps to have a dedicated scribe there who can keep track of new things. If somebody just says it, they can note it down. They can keep track of the broader situation as it develops as well. And then the contributors. So it's a bit of a catch-all for everybody who plays an active part in the incident. Depending on the size of the incident, you could have specializations within that. There could be the IT security who are focusing on investigating the network and things like that. You could have application security, looking at what could have happened on the application side, things like that. So that's basically everything that I wanted to talk about. Thank you everyone for your time. Cake and keys. If you want to learn a little bit more about incident response and the thought process behind it, highly encourage Cuckoo's Egg by Chris Sanders. It's a free online course, and it goes through how a small discrepancy in the billing for a computer actually led to uncovering a pretty major incident. This was right at the beginning of the internet and things like that. So highly encourage checking that out. Alrighty, thank you everyone.